Valar Morghulis. I'm Egg from the Citadel, or in Italian La Cittadella, and I'm here with my two co-hosts, Saya and Rory. But most importantly, we have the honor today to be joined by two great people from the community, from the international fandom of Song of Ice and Fire, which are Elio and Linda from Westeros.org, that you sure know them for the World of Ice and Fire that they wrote or co-wrote with George. And I hope everyone knows you, but for the few people that maybe don't know you, do you want to present yourself?
Sure. I'll start. Yes, I'm Elio Garcia, and this is Linda Antonsson, my wife. We sort of met online many years ago. We fell in love with the books. We got in touch with George about them. Initially, we got in touch with him because we wanted to make a role-playing game online. That's how we met, actually. And George, after much consideration, said yes, and he started sending us his notes for the time period which our game was going to be set in, and we got to talking about various things, and somehow we became his fact checkers when he realized that we knew things about the books that he had already forgotten. So and that led to us writing The World of Ice and Fire. At the same time, we Westeros.org became this website, this first community of international fans, mostly English speakers, but we have fans from all over the world on it. And it became sort of the first big core of the fandom for Song of Ice and Fire, and I guess Game of Thrones when it came out.
Okay, great. Obviously, we are all big fans of yours here. And in particular, I have to thank you because this channel was born thanks to the World of Ice and Fire. And obviously, I use pretty much every day the wiki and the forum to check everything for my videos and my research. And actually, the World of Ice and Fire was the first A Song of Ice and Fire book that I bought as soon as it came out, because as many people, I came into the fandom thanks to the TV show, in particular after the third season. So all the other books up to Dance with Dragons were already out. So then I read all of them, and the first one I waited for was The World of Ice and Fire. And after reading that, I found all the interesting details that for sure couldn't be put in the TV show. And so I decided to open the channel to talk about those details for everyone to know them. Just like the Citadel of Old Town spreads the wisdom around Westeros, I wanted to do the same for Italian fans. Yeah. And speaking of Italian fans and Italy, maybe Rory, do you want to ask something?
Yes, thank you. And now let's talk a bit about your story with our country.
Yes.
Because we understand that at least one of you has lived in Italy.
Yes.
So
that would be me, actually. Yes. I have two actually connections to Italy. First, yes, I lived there. I think it would be like 1982 through like 1984, something like that. I was very young. My father is I was born in the United States, but my father was a soldier in the United States Army, and he was based at the Vicenza base. The Camp Ederly is the base there. I don't quite know how it came about, but they sent me, instead of sending me onto the schooling on the base, I was sent to I went to a Catholic parochial school and in Italian, as far as I remember, and I learned Italian and everything. I remember nuns. I remember messing around with a friend on the steps once, and a nun grabbed us by the ears. It was very old school. I don't know if they do that anymore, but
oh no, they do. I went to Catholic school. They do.
It's good to hear that the nuns are evolving the traditions.
Never change.
Yeah, no, wonderful. And so I remember, I mean, obviously when I was at 3 or 4, I don't remember much, but the last year I remember quite well, and have very fond memories. I know we've visited Venice, and my memories of that, such as they are, have helped me really understand, it adds a little bit to the picture of Bravos, for example, because obviously the canals and what I mainly remember is it smelled a lot, like the water. Like when Sam talks about the waters, you know, I like that I remember how that smelled when we were out there, and the seagulls. There were seagulls all over the place when we were there.
Yes, of course.
The other connection is my name, Elio. It's a very Italian name. My father is Elio. My grandfather is Elio. My great-grandfather named my grandfather Elio because in Cuba, my family is Cuban. His best friend was actually an Italian immigrant named Elio, and so through him I've gotten my name. So that's the other connection I have.
Sadly, I'd have to say my connection is mainly my subject at university has been classical history. So I've studied a lot of Etruscan and Roman history, and would have loved to visit and see some of the sites, but that hasn't happened yet. But I'm very familiar with Italian history, less familiar with modern Italy, I'd have to say, unfortunately.
Okay. And what's your experience with the Italian ASOIAF community?
Really, I mean, I've known for many years that the Italian fans have been some of the most, dedicated and really like devoted fans of like Songs and Fire. There's that big, I think, comics convention that you have a festival each year. I forget the name of it.
Is it Luca Comics?
Yes, where I think it was some of the earliest like cosplayers we ever saw were fans at that convention doing the costumes based on the books years before Game of Thrones came out. And then we've sometimes we see tweets on Twitter from Italian fans. That's how we came across you guys, seeing some tweets, and I've seen the tweets over some months. And so when I with my Spanish and the translate feature, I was able to read what was going on. I see you guys are having you're doing vlogs, you're doing podcasts, you got websites, you're doing all these things, and it's been really interesting. It's just sad that we haven't had more contact earlier, because we've always wanted to go there. We kind of hoped when the World of Ice and Fire came out, but the Italian publisher would actually invite us over at some point, but it never happened.
Okay, let's go to the next topic, which is actually why this call even exists, which is the news about the play that will be about the Torneo at Harrenhal, that actually you were the first to discover, but unfortunately Ebert got the exclusive for the article.
Yes.
Anyway, I leave the floor to Saya for this.
Yes.
Thank you, Egg. Much to the pain of all that know me and my history on this channel, I'm a very long-winded person. So bear with me for a while as I set a little scene. So let's imagine we have a whole teaming with people sitting in a long banquet table, and you can hear maybe cutlery noises in the background, but the audience is silent. The people are silent because there's the sound of an harp that's filling the hall, and the voice of a silver-haired man singing of Twilight's Frontier and Death of Kings, because that's very poetic. A girl starts crying, and then the lights go out and the audience applauds, because we're not in Harrenhal, but we're on Broadway watching a play. How did we get here? Well, Simon Painter, Tim Lawson, and Jonathan Stanford are serving as producer, and the project has very great names attached to it, such as award-winning writer Duncan Macmillan and director Dominic Cook. George R.R. Martin has declared himself impressed by the knowledge of and love for his world that the producers showed, and their plan for production too, aiming for a 2023 debut, I think. However, Elio and Linda discovered this project, and the Song of Ice and Fire Italian community, the Italian ones and the international one, know this news since February, because they shared it and we speculated all together, basically. So to start, what you guys think of the idea of this play?
Well, it was interesting when we started poking around and found this reference to A Song of Ice and Fire by The Works on the website, for the agent's website, right? And Elio started looking around and found this theater production company called The Works, and like, it can't be that, can it? Like, it sounded so odd. Like, okay, are they going to do a remake of A Song of Ice and Fire on stage? Does this not fall somehow under the rights that HBO has? So this will be, you know, A Song of Ice and Fire rather than Game of Thrones. We couldn't quite make sense of it, but it was very intriguing. And then when the news came out, then when the news broke that this was in fact a theater production and that it would be about the tourney at Harrenhal, that was quite the news. It's been something that, you know, ever since, well, people have been fascinated by Harrenhal for a long time, and George didn't make it less so when he commented. I think this was when we were working on The World of Ice and Fire.
Even before.
Or maybe even before, where he said that a lot happened at Harrenhal. Because I think you asked a question at some point, actually. I think that's where it came from.
Well, I think it's in the subject part. I don't know if I asked it, but
I think it might have been.
Yeah.
But where he said, want to know more details about Harrenhal and what happened, and the answer being a lot happened at Harrenhal. That was obviously very intriguing.
Specifically, I think George also said, you know, I could write a whole novel just about the tourney. Yeah.
But also said that he wouldn't.
Yeah.
So that was good news and disappointing news at the same time. And now the idea of getting to see it in some medium, at least, is very intriguing, I think.
Yeah, it's been a bit controversial. I've seen the responses online. Obviously, people have very mixed feelings about this. Can we say a lot of people who are tired of waiting for things just see this as an excuse for George not to write. Somebody says, "Oh, now we're not going to get to see tourney in the books." And I mean, the problem I have about it is, like, we were never going to see the tourney in the books. It's an event that happened long in the past. We would get more information, but we would only learn whatever was important specifically to the novels.
We've already had a flashback to the tourney in Mira's story. We're not going to get another one.
Yeah, why would we get more? So, and there's also people who have this perspective that this play should show us everything George has imagined about all those events. It's like, and one of the things I did, you know, I've never been to a Broadway production. I've never been to the West End. I've never been to a play. But I kind of look like, how long do plays tend to run? Like, you know, what is the length you could expect? And plays apparently can go from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. The Works Entertainment is very interesting because what they've done mostly is not plays per se. They've done spectacular live entertainments. They've done magic shows. They've done circus shows on stage. So to me, what I'm imagining is the core of this will be the spectacle of the tourney, the costumes, maybe dancing. It's not going to be a musical. They said that it's not a musical, but there'll be stuff to kind of make it colorful and exciting. But at the same time, it has to have a dramatic core. It has to have drama. It has to have a story. One imagines it'll have a little bit of Romeo and Juliet. It'll have a bit of all these things that people imagine, but it only has a limited time to do it in. So this idea that we're going to get, for example, when George wrote The Year of the Fall Spring for The World of Ice and Fire, which is what he wrote that himself. That wasn't we just edited it a little bit. We didn't write it. George hints at all the things that were happening behind the scenes that we don't know about. The machinations, the idea there might have been a conspiracy being hatched there. George is not, I mean, this play will not have us see the negotiations and the meetings and all of these events. There's only so much time. So I presume that the title that we saw on the Startling Inc. website, A Song of Ice and Fire, is the working title for this, which means that it is about ice and fire. It is about Stark and Targaryen. It'll be about Knight of a Laughing Tree, no doubt, and Rhaegar, that silver-haired melancholy prince. I think that'll be the focus. It'll have stuff around it. It'll have, no doubt, humor. It'll have drama. It'll have action. But it's going to be really focused, I think.
Yeah, we were about the musical bit. I was trying not to laugh because we were talking about it when the news first broke. And my first thought, I don't know why, was, can you imagine Robert Baratheon singing in the play? Because yeah, it's perfect for a character like Rhaegar, but the other. So yeah, I'm pleased to know that it's not a musical, but it was literally the first thought I had, and I don't even know why. So
can you imagine
yeah,
a musical, an operatic Ice and Fire, 30 years ago, Pavarotti as Robert Baratheon?
The mystery part of the whole Tourney of Harrenhal thing, it's very fascinating, as every tourney needs its mystery knight, it is said, and there are lots of speculation about who the Knight of the Laughing Tree is. So there are some people who think it's Ned, there are people who think it's Benjen, and it goes even to Howland and Jamie. Even though he left. Lyanna is still the fan favorite. So do you guys believe it's actually Lyanna? We will see Lyanna being the knight, or is it something else?
Yeah, I'd say we feel pretty. We don't know. Again, always like to preface with that when it comes to it's not something that George has confirmed or anything. But yeah, I do think it is Lyanna. The hints are there about her being able to a great rider, knowing how to ride rings, and
there's a line from Jamie that jousting is 3/4 horsemanship when talking about Loras Tyrell. We have a remark from Lady Dustin, isn't it, who says that
she was like a Kentaur, right?
Yeah, but that she was half a Kentaur, whatever.
Yeah, half a Kentaur.
Loved riding. So we think that's the direction. I mean, is it a great chance that she managed to defeat these knights? But it's sort of like that situation where Jamie talks about sorry, not Jamie, it's Barristan remarks about Mormont, how he won his tourney at Lannisport, but he was no great knight champion at jouster, but it's something as simple as the favor of a lady around his arm moved him to be able to do these heroic feats. And for whatever reason, maybe it was time for Lyanna to felt like she had to do something heroic, and because of it, she did it. She had the wolf's blood, as Ned said.
Yeah, I think at this point everybody knows that it's Lyanna, but the more interesting mysteries, for me at least, are the motivations of Rhaegar. And that's why I'm scared for this play, because I'm scared that they will do like the TV show where they just relied on the love story. But we know, at least we think that maybe Rhaegar, there was also a prophecy, there was maybe some dreams and so on, that makes everything more mysterious and complicated, and maybe too complicated to show in a TV show, or in this case in a play. And I also think that all of these, of course, I think we will have some answers, for example, about R+L in the books. But I think the true motivations and Rhaegar in general will remain a bit mysterious and ambiguous also in the next books. So I'm a bit scared about this. If you go to explain maybe not well all these aspects in the play.
No, that's a good point. I agree that there's a danger there that if they can make it very obscure, even on the stage, even if they make a whole play around it, or they could make it really simple and explicit. I agree with you that we really think, prophecy and played a large part of it. It's probably not as simple a story as, the story Viserys told Daenerys, that, Rhaegar loved Lyanna and carried her off. And it's more complicated than that. It brought around the fall of his house. That wasn't what he was intending, right? Things went out of control and spiraled out of shape for various reasons. And it'll be really interesting to see, for example, if the aftermath is somehow hinted at, like why things fall out so badly. At the same time, obviously 2023, knock on wood, George seems to feel like he's made good progress on the Winds of Winter. I presume the Winds of Winter is the book where he intends things as explicit as they're going to be, and then really not deal with it anymore. I don't think the last book will have any last revelations for us about the events of the past. I mean, George even, I think years ago, I think he talked about, Howland Reed appearing in like the 6th book of the series, that just before the final book. I don't know if that's actually still happening. Things have changed a lot and the shape of the story, but he seems to have had the idea that we would learn sort of the key facts about what was going on during the rebellion and before the rebellion, so we could just go on and set up the stage for the final events of the books. So I think this will be a compliment. It'll be a really interesting, because to me it's like George is never going to write a Robert's Rebellion novel. He was never going to have one where Rhaegar is a primary character. I presume Rhaegar will be a primary character in this.
Yes, and I don't think it's certain that we would never get Rhaegar as a point of view in the books. That seemed extremely unlikely. So his motivations will always have to be seen from the outside. Obviously, in a play, you can have speeches and such from characters, depending entirely on how modern or how classical you go with the play, and then are you going to have a soliloquy of somebody explaining themselves to some degree and giving insight into decisions. Otherwise, you're going to see characters very much from the outside if you don't get that sort of insight. But it probably will be the closest thing we get to having Rhaegar as a main character. And yes, I certainly hope for a complicated picture in that sense, as complicated as they can make it in the time allotted. But they would definitely then have to focus on Rhaegar and Lyanna, I guess, or Stark Targaryen, and then Rhaegar and Lyanna as the main protagonists of that, to be able to give a reasonable amount of depth in the time that they have.
Yeah, my hope personally is that there are so many notable characters. Personally, I love both the characters of Rhaegar and Lyanna, but also in the journey there are so many others, like Howland Reed, for example. Well, we haven't talked about Ashara Dane yet, which I love so much, and I hope she will get some light in this play.
Yep. Certainly, I'd be very curious to see if Ashara Dane and if her brother Arthur Dane are featured in any way. So many people from all of Westeros are there. The Red Viper was there. Elia was there. It's Aerys, of course, was there. It'll be really interesting to see how they do it.
It's the who's who of the year, basically.
Yeah.
Everyone's there. So
I wanted to ask one last thing about the tourney, which is maybe, I don't know if you know something about that, but an interesting thing is the song that Rhaegar sings that makes people cry, in particular Lyanna. Then we have the funny scene with Benjen that she pours wine on his head. Anyway, there is a theory about this song being the Janice song that Rhaegar maybe wrote for the Ghost of Iart, because we know that Rhaegar went to Summerall with his harp and came back with songs, and we probably know that the Ghost of Iart lost her friend there, Jenny, and so it's all so, let's say, connected, seems connected, all of this. What do you think about it?
I have seen the theory that he is the author of the Song of Jenny of Oldstone. It's possible. I feel like it feels a little strange to me, but it wouldn't have been made explicit already in A Storm of Swords when it's discussed. But it could be a thing where George didn't necessarily have the idea, and it's only come later. I mean, one of the things that become very clear as we've worked with him, as we've talked with him over the years, as fans have asked him questions, that Song of Ice and Fire has been a constantly evolving project. The shape of it has changed a lot. Like, he still has a direction he wants to go, but there are some parts of the story that are very different from what he originally was thinking he was going to do. Partly because it's expanded, partly because it's gotten a lot more complicated. So, could he have come up with that idea? Yes, and certainly what we know is, I think it's Barristan, I think, who talks about Rhaegar coming back with songs of the ghosts and the dead kings, and it certainly fits the Jenny Oldstone song. That's kind of the classic that we see of a lament for what has been lost. So I could see it. It would dovetail really nicely together if that were true, especially because even if you think about what was lost, and Catelyn used to play at being Jenny, and Littlefinger was her Prince of Dragonflies, and of course he very clearly saw Catelyn as someone he lost, an opportunity lost, and a future that was lost to him, perhaps. So it makes some nice parallels.
And I could definitely see them, whether or not they get that information from George, and whether that is the case or not, it would certainly be a good choice for a song to have in the play, because it would tie together all these levels of tragic love stories. And then basically you'd have the play itself setting up a tragic love story, and then you'd have the story within the story, which would be Rhaegar singing about Jenny of Oldstone. So I could certainly see that fitting together very nicely in that sense.
Okay, so if anyone wants to add something about the topic of the play or the Torneo Eternal in general, otherwise we will go to the questions.
Well, the only other thought I've had, I've been wondering, is like, if you're going to actually show a tourney as part of a spectacle, how do you show a tournament on the stage, on Broadway, on the West End? Is it like Monty Python with someone, or shadow puppets, or is it like in the War Horse where they have this gigantic wooden puppets that they'll So I'm kind of very curious about that aspect, like, because I imagine it's going to be, they're going to try to make it spectacular.
Yeah. I mean, given that they have done spectacle, as you say, the works, I do think and hope that we might see something like the War Horse. I mean, they would need 2 of them, but they'd only need 2 at any given time for the tourney, and then they need a person on them. I think that could look amazing if they pulled off something like that. I definitely hope they don't go for the coconuts. But
if you're not familiar with the War Horse play, I mean, the War Horse play was a famous production that they turned into a TV series, and there they made a giant wickerwork horse that was puppeted by 3 people, 2 people handling the legs and the motions, and then like one person holding the reins and looking like he was moving, the head. And it was quite complicated, and it was very realistic. I recall seeing videos where they introduced this wicker war horse to actual horses, and the horses were very confused because the body language was right, but it didn't look like any horse they'd ever seen before.
It didn't smell right, and it didn't look right, but it's acting like a horse.
So I'd be very interested to see how they'll handle it. I hope, maybe, I don't know how it works. Like, do we start giving you previews? Next year, can we start seeing things where we'll start showing kind of how we're doing things, or it's all going to be top secret until they're ready to premiere?
At least they don't have to do a dragon.
No, unless like a dream or something, I guess,
Yeah, of course, we have a lot of questions about that should be answered when the play comes out. And also, I think and I hope that they will also record it, because I think not a lot of people will have the opportunity to go see it. So that's another question that I hope they will.
I know, but they do that for like operas, and they do it for some sort of national theater. I think they've done it for the Globe, some of the Shakespeare productions. So I would hope at some point. I mean, the talk is we do hope to do it. They hope to do it in New York, in London, and in Sydney, I guess, in Australia, with the hopes of doing it in many more places. How many productions get that famous and popular, I don't know, but it'd be great if they at some point they did do ever released a DVD or Blu-ray, or did a streaming option, or even a live stream to theaters. I know theaters do have for like ballet productions and opera productions. That'd be kind of cool to be able to go to a theater, like an IMAX theater or something, and see it being done live. That would be quite amazing.
The community has lots of questions for you guys, because they saw the exchange you had with Egg on Twitter, and they started asking questions, and then we did a live after we planned this one, and we announced that we were going to do some sort of Q&A, or if they had any questions. Well, 73 arrived, 74. So we had to do a few cuts here and there, but Egg will introduce you to a few from the A Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers community in Italy.
So let's start with the questions. As Saya mentioned, we also asked other Italian A Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers to send us video clips with their question.
Morgulis, Linda and Elio. I'm Lucio.
And I am Vittorio.
And we are the hosts of a YouTube channel called World of Ice and Fire.
And thank you. Thank you for your book. Because we opened this channel to talk about your book, and thank you for this great opportunity for the ASOIAF Italian community.
But now we have to switch to Italian, because our English skills suck, as you can see, so it's better for us to switch to Italian. George Martin è uno scrittore incredibile quando si tratta di stupire il lettore. Pensiamo alla morte di Ned Stark, pensiamo alle Nozze Rosse, pensiamo anche all'introduzione di Young Griff, a.k.a. Aegon Targaryen, nel quinto libro. Però tutte queste cose nessuno le ha viste arrivare, ma intanto sono passati 10 anni dalla pubblicazione del quinto libro di Undead with Dragons, e in questi 10 anni sono successe un bel po' di cose nella community.
La community ha passato questi ultimi 10 anni in assenza di libri della serie principale a teorizzare chi sarebbe vissuto e chi sarebbe morto, quando sarebbe morto nel corso del prossimo libro, quale battaglia sarebbe stata vinta o persa da quale schieramento, e nel corso di tutti questi anni molte teorie sono andate a rispondere a svariati interrogativi e sono diventate la verità per la community, vedasi la teoria del falso Aegon.
Inoltre, sempre in questi 10 anni c'è stata la serie TV dell'HBO che ci ha regalato un finale, che magari non sarà il finale, ma è un finale che ci dà comunque degli indizi su quello che può essere il futuro di questa saga, anche per quanto riguarda i libri. Quindi la nostra domanda per voi, che siete massimi conoscitori sia dell'opera di Martin, sia della community di A Song of Ice and Fire, è: riuscirà Martin, nonostante tutto questo, a stupirci ancora come ha fatto in passato?
Oppure questi 10 anni ci sono serviti per rovinarci la sorpresa? Fra le migliaia di teorie effettivamente la community ha indovinato quella definitiva e quindi nulla ci potrà più sorprendere, perché è passato troppo tempo a teorizzare, a parlare dei dettagli sparsi per i libri. Vi ringraziamo di nuovo per questa opportunità che ci avete concesso e speriamo di non essere troppo molesti con questa domanda.
E ringraziamo anche Egg che ci ha permesso di far parte di questo video.
Yes, first, thank you, Lucio and Vittorio. Thank you very much for asking a question and naming your podcast after our book. Really cool. I would say yes. I mean, if you have been involved in the community as long as we've been, like, and you saw how people speculated, like, after Clash of Kings, what was going to happen in Summer Swords, and how wildly wrong most people were about what was going to happen. And then the same, a Summer Swords or Feast for Crows, very few people have. So I think George has a lot of surprises still in store for everyone, really. I think there's aspects of the story in particular which are very, very up in the air. Stuff like Aegon and his invasion and how that's going to play out, exactly how Daenerys is going to get herself over to Westeros, events that are going to happen around that battle, who might survive it, who might be killed. There's a lot of mysteries left, so I think fans will be surprised. I mean, Game of Thrones has revealed some things, but as George has said, you know, there's a lot of characters they didn't really follow up on, and there's a lot of things that they may have changed a bit because they streamlined it so much.
And even if you know the end point, the rough end point even for some characters, you probably don't know how they really got to that end
Yes.
point, given the simplifications of the show. There are no jetpacks in the books, or dragons that fly at the speed of 747s. So there are going to be things that are different.
Okay. Then we have a question from lo Stannerman.
Ciao Egg, e grazie ancora per avermi dato questa possibilità per poter fare una domanda a Elio e Linda, che saluto anche loro, li ringrazio ancora per tutto quello che hanno fatto, per il mondo del ghiaccio e del fuoco e quant'altro. Li saluto e grazie ancora Egg. Faccio questa domanda in italiano perché se la faccio in inglese potenzialmente ci potrebbero essere crisi diplomatiche non da poco, quindi evito, per il mio inglese poco bello. E la mia domanda è la seguente e riguarda il personaggio di Stannis nel sesto libro. Penso che sia la domanda migliore che possa fare io in particolare, essendo un grande estimatore del personaggio. Se ovviamente loro hanno informazioni in merito, nel caso, vabbè, fa niente, non è un problema. La domanda è questa. Visto come il personaggio di Stannis è stato sviluppato nella serie TV, lasciandolo sostanzialmente come un personaggio ridotto a essere off-screen nella battaglia e off-screen nella morte, vorrei sapere se il personaggio in sé, all'interno dei libri, quindi nel sesto in particolare, avrà un'importanza diversa, avrà comunque un qualcosa in più, o sarà semplicemente come nella serie TV un personaggio che si limita a apparire e poi scompare per determinati motivi di trama. Quindi la domanda è molto semplice. Stannis avrà un'importanza maggiore rispetto alla serie TV nel sesto libro, o anche lì sarà un nulla di fatto? Grazie ancora a Egg per la disponibilità e spero che Elio e Linda possano rispondere o comunque dare una loro impressione a questa mia domanda. Grazie ancora e niente, buona continuazione.
Yes, I do think so. Thank you, Vittorio, for the question. I would say yes to a degree, but we've long held for many years, long before the show, that Stannis and he's a tragic figure, and he's going to have a dark or a very final ending before the ending of a series. So
he's never somebody that we expected to be in the final book, for example, or not much of the final book.
Yes, he's not going to, yeah.
The very final battles, the very final decisions. That's not where we expect to see Stannis. So, but the way that they wrap it up in the show is again still going to be significantly different from how George does it.
Yeah. Okay, great. And now we have the ones with the best English, I think, between us. So I will share.
Hello, Elio. Hello, Linda. We are the Song of Ice and Fire Italian podcast. My name is Chiara, and here with me are Baeatrice and Domenico. Hi.
Hi.
Unfortunately, Jacopo couldn't be with us, but he helped us every step of the way. It's a pleasure to be recording this video and to be part of this interview with Egg. Here are our questions. Let's start with mine. I've done some research in the past couple of days about how and when the idea for The World of Ice and Fire came to be, like listening to all the interviews, reading articles decades old, etc. It's been fun. I'm always very intrigued by this sort of processes, like how certain ideas and things come about. We know that George provided you all the extra lore material to be included in the book, such as the history of the Targaryen kings. Other than that, which were the POVs in A Song of Ice and Fire that helped you the most in gathering information for The World of Ice and Fire? We're asking you this question because in our little project of reading, we found a lot, and I mean a lot of information about the history of Westeros in Jaime's POV chapters in A Storm of Sword, or even in Cersei's in A Fist for Crows.
Yes, thank you, Chiara. That's you're exactly right. They actually have surprising amount of information, especially from a perspective of sort of the nobility, sort of the court history, the history of the noble class in Westeros, of the conflicts between them, of the courts of various kings. Tyrion, of course, a great source of historical information, more widespread than Jaime, but I mean even a good one from Jaime is in A Dance with Dragons. Is that right? It's been so long now. No, Feast for Crows. Sorry. In which he talks about. No, it has to have been a Dance of Dragons. Is it? He meets the Blackwoods in
A Dance of Dragons.
A Dance of Dragons. Sorry. It's been so long.
You need another reread, darling.
Yes. I've been. It's all kind of a blur these days. Where he talks about the Blackwood Raventree's towers and the way that the towers are very like their shape. The fact the round towers means that they came at a certain point in time, or if they're square towers, they're probably from a different point in time. And we use that kind of information to kind of tease out the whole history of Westeros. So we have a reference to, arguments about how old certain towers are in Winterfell based on what their shapes are. I think we have something about the first keep. So Tyrion, Catelyn actually provided a lot of really interesting tidbits. Bran gets something, but thanks to being our point of view, to Maester Luwin providing lessons. Like that's an important one. So absolutely, I think all the characters have had something.
But it's a really interesting question, looking at it that way, and then looking at what are the interests and what is important for these different characters, because that tends to be what they provide information about. Is it Bran with his interest in knights and history? That's where we get some of that from one perspective.
Sansa and the romances and chivalry.
Sansa about the romances. Jaime and Cersei, because they lived the court situation, the court intrigues, they get that sense. Tyrion is another who has book learning and so knows a lot of things from that rather than from practical experience. But certainly the Lannisters do seem to be very good sources of information.
Yeah.
So no, it's a fascinating.
It's really more so that, like, if you look at the Starks, because they're all young for the most part. So most of what we know about the Watch, of course, comes from Jon's point of view, I suppose, because he's like the only one who's up there. But
it's him experiencing it,
or other people telling him.
And also, Ned is not like, we get a lot of what Ned has experienced himself in the past, but Ned is not really somebody who provides, again, a lot of book learning or book details.
Good point. Ned actually has very little about the far past. He has the Robert's Rebellion stuff.
He has the Robert's Rebellion stuff, but he's not somebody who's been sitting there reading a bunch of history books and is telling us what he's learned from those. Tyrion is obviously the one who's got the most from book learning, I would say. So it's an intriguing way of looking at it, I have to say. I was fascinated by the question.
Okay, let's go to the next one.
Hello, Elio. Hello, Linda. I'm Beatrice. Well, first I want to thank you for this amazing opportunity, and thanks to Egg for having us. Moving to the tourney at Harrenhal, that will be the main focus of the new stage play everybody's talking about, and to Robert's Rebellion in general. We dedicated a special series of videos in our little podcast project to what happened in those fateful years from the year of the Fall Spring to the end of the war. But the more we dug into that, the more we felt there still are major loose ends, as obviously George didn't want to reveal everything. So do you reckon the stage play will succeed in solving some of these issues, casting a whole new light on characters such as the mysterious and beautiful Shara Dane? For instance, a theory that fascinates me has it that Illyria Dane is not Shara's sister, but her not-so-dead daughter. So will we finally get to know more about the child Shara allegedly conceived at Harrenhal?
Thank you, Beatrice. I would say that they should provide us some more information about some of these characters, some more insights in this play. In particular, obviously, it has to be Rhaegar and Lyanna who are going to be kind of the central focus, and will provide us some more details there. I should hope that a Shara Dane, Brandon Stark, some of these other characters will be shown. As far as the holes, I mean, there are big mystery areas. It's absolutely true. One of the things early on with the World of Ice and Fire, George talked about, is like he didn't really want to write too much about the Robert's Rebellion era, because in part he said it was, he wants to reveal like key things in the books, but at the same time it was also like his timeline of the Robert's Rebellion and like the key events was not even then. So we're talking 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
even then it wasn't entirely fixed. Like, even then there were still details that George thought he might shift around, he might tweak, he might come up with some new configurations of things to kind of motivate the plot. So even there, he did not want to get pinned down. So I think to the degree that for something like this, they'll ask him, well, look, we really want to pin down some of these things. He seems to be on board with that. So obviously when someone else is adapting the work, it's not necessarily George directly. Like, they may have to make changes to better suit the medium or the story we're telling. We saw this with Game of Thrones. They made a lot of changes, maybe not always because they had to, but because they wanted to. But so I suspect we'll see when it comes out some discussion. There'll be stuff like interviews with George kind of discussing, and they'll be asked, like, how much does this fit your vision of things? And he'll probably give us a sense of how close it is to exactly what he planned, if it's just the broad shape of it, or if it's, I can't imagine it'll be like, oh, it's not really rated at all what I wanted because they decided to do it. I don't think that.
No, I don't really think so. I think it will have a lot of George's vision in it, but again, if we talk about the amount of time they have to work with, they have to set it up as well as an independent play, in the sense that it has to work for someone who hasn't read the books or seen the TV show. I presume they're not going to say, oh, and now we're gonna wait here at the beginning while you recap yourself on the books and the TV show. It needs to be a relatively self-contained story, so there will be things that they can't touch on that are mysteries that affect the greater story, because it simply wouldn't make any sense to the more self-contained story that they'll have to tell in the play. So will there be some characters that maybe will just get a nod because it's not, they can't delve into it, and it's not really important for the piece of the story that they'll be telling. But yes, I'd
like to see him dance, actually. Mira has a story of all the famous people dancing, and Ashara Dane dancing, all these people. It'd be lovely just to have this thing with everyone dancing and
that would be a nice way of just seeing
beautiful
people.
Woman kind of dancing with one great night to another, and you never quite know who she is. I don't know. The other part of it is the theory that Illyria Dane is not Ashara's sister. George said she's the youngest sister, I think, of the family.
Yes, but the family tree also says that John is Ned's bastard son. So.
Yes, it could. I suppose.
There is a considerable age difference.
Well, there would be, I guess, yes. But on the other hand, there's a big difference between, Illyria and Ned. She's clearly older than Ned, Edric.
Ashara.
So Illyria.
No, you mean that Ned? Yeah, no, yeah, too many Neds.
I think we'll learn. I think we could learn more. I could see the possibility of Ashara and her story being used as a parallel, a poetic kind of dramatic or thematic parallel to what's going on with Lyanna and Rhaegar. If we're right about what's going on with Lyanna and Rhaegar, it might be interesting if that's the case. Although there are complications with the Ashara story from what we're told in the books from various people. That'll be really interesting.
But certainly that would have precedent in various plays of having two couples that...
Shakespeare did it all the time, for example. Yes.
Okay, let's go to the last one in video.
Hello Linda, hello Elio, and thank you all for this opportunity. I am Domenico, and in our podcast, Il Podcast del Ghiaccio e del Fuoco, we have underlined many times the central role of House Went in geopolitics of Riverlands, and in particular at the Torneo of Harrenhal. Unfortunately, the family tree of House Went isn't so clear, despite an interview of Martin about this. So, could we hope for a family tree of House Went and a confirmation of their support for House Targaryen during Robert's rebellion in the musical or in Winds of Winter?
Thank you.
for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity. Bye.
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 Thanks, Domenico, for that question. It depends a little bit on to what degree just production will do the same thing as the Game of Thrones did, or Game of Thrones did the TV show, where they posted all this information around the show ahead of time. They posted, their own family trees and guides and things. And they start releasing things and introducing things, because obviously the whole idea is Lord Went has a tourney there to celebrate his daughter's name day, and the sons are taking part in the tournament, and it would make sense to have them as minor players at least, and maybe give us a little more sense of where, in particular, if the play deals with the conspiracy that is supposed to be taking place, to the degree that Lord Went is a knowing, willing participant. And of course, we have a great Knight of the Kingsguard, wherever the Kingsguard, how they'll feature.
Yeah.
I certainly would hope to
Don't plays tend to have like a bit of an information booklet or something for people?
Oftentimes they do, to kind of
which tend to introduce the characters and so on.
I think so.
This would seem like the kind of play where you definitely need to provide.
And then again, I mean, maybe it's possible. I mean, certainly this sort of thing. My understanding is there's a lot of souvenir books and pamphlets and things that kind of go along with it. So I would expect there'd be some materials. I think it's entirely possible we'll get some more, whether they'll play a prominent role in this play, I do not know. And as to whether the role there isn't the Winds of Winter will provide more information about the Wents, probably not, I think, but maybe, I guess. I wouldn't be so sure. I mean, I know that, for example, like George has a family tree for House Dane that I assume is intended for the Winds of Winter to be published in that one. I don't know that he has a similar tree for House Went. I mean, obviously, I think they're all dead, except there's the mystery about like whether Lady Went is actually dead or not. George, I think, left her alive, I think by mistake, in the appendix of A Dance of Dragons or A Feast for Crows. But anyways,
I'm sure he'll correct that.
Yeah.
Very interesting, the part about House Dane's family tree. We will have for sure other questions about the topic. We have here a great Dane fan inside.
Yeah, that's me.
The Danes are definitely one of my favorites. They're just so evocative. That dream at the Tower of Joy is just like, oh yes, I just want to know everything.
Yes. Dane fanboy.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, so let's go on with the questions from the community. So Rory, if you want to start.
Yes, with the most asked question of all time. What's your relationship with George at the moment, and your involvement, if any, in the development of the Winds of Winter?
He has asked us a couple of sort of questions over the last couple of years about Winds of Winter related things that he's mentioned a couple of details about things that he has been working on, which we can't share, I'm afraid, but it's not, I mean, now
it's less now because he has his on-site assistants, 4 or 5 of them, or they multiply all the time, so I'm not sure how many they are, but obviously he has them to do research for him, which oftentimes is probably faster, but I guess when they don't come up with something or they are not handy, it shows up with us, but it's been a while. So yes, a little bit, a few little insights into what he's doing with the Winds of Winter, based on what the questions he's asked. But beyond that, it's because of COVID and everything, it's obviously been a very a strange year where he hasn't been taking part in any physical conventions or anything. So it's been a bit more distance than usual in that sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I will go with the next question about dragon dreams, because we know that dragon dreams are an important characteristic of the Targaryens, or maybe of the Valyrians in general, with the blood of the dragon. But in Fire and Blood, which is, let's say, the definitive book about House Targaryen, because I don't see George going back to tell again the story of House Targaryen in that period. So we don't see, dragon dreams are never even mentioned in Fire and Blood. There is maybe just an implicit mention of Dennis the Dreamer, which is obviously the most famous case of dragon dreams, but looks like in the entire book about the Targaryens, it's missing one of their main characteristics. Is this because of the point of view of Gildain? Because we know the book is written from the perspective of a maester, or is it because they actually didn't have dragon dreams during these years? Because maybe there were dragons. Could that be related?
Interesting thought, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that. I remember that we had a discussion in the sense that the characters that are, there is a gap in which characters are confirmed or even hinted at as being able to have prophetic dreams. So we have Daenerys, and then we have Daeron the Drunken. We've speculated very loosely at like maybe somebody like Baelor in his religious manias and all that. Did he have some kind of, we don't really see any sense, any indications of actual prophetic dreams with him, but one could wonder if that was something that was driving his various odd attempts through his life. Was there something like that? And then obviously later on we have Rhaegar and we have Daenerys. So Gildain's perspective could definitely be one part of it, but also I think that maybe when George decides that characters have dreams or not, it kind of depends on what serves the plot to a large extent. And because the characters of those periods didn't feature in any stories, I mean, basically all the examples we have other than Daenerys are from actual novels or novellas, in that we have characters driving plot. In the Duncan Egg stories, we have characters in the main Song of Ice and Fire story driving plot through these dreams. And so they don't come up in just historical material.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously the person I think would be obvious potential dreamers in the period covered Fire and Blood are Visenya and Aegon the Conqueror, perhaps. Visenya for her sorcery, and her having alleged sorceress abilities might mean that she was attuned in some fashion. And Aegon, with the strangeness of how he came to conclude, but he had to go west, whether it was just a fulfillment of prophecy or if he had dreams. And then if it's not talked about, I mean, there's a lot of mystery around. If you read, I mean, how he's presented, there's a lot of mystery about what Aegon thought and believed. He was someone who didn't really open himself up to anybody but his siblings. So he was a very remote figure. And it's entirely possible that Gildain wouldn't talk about it because he doesn't really think anything of the magic and so on. I think on the other hand, if you think of something like Daeron the Drunken, who very clearly does have the dreams, well, his grandmother is a Blackwood, which is kind of interesting because, of course, we have another famous half Blackwood, part Blackwood, part Targaryen, who definitely had dreams of some sort. His dreams were green, I guess, on the other hand. So, talking about Bloodraven, of course. Yeah. So whether that's the connection there, that anyone who has dragon dreams has recently had contact with, in their lineage, with someone from outside the Targaryen line who has some of her blood, whether it's somebody of the first men, like the Blackwoods are, or, you know, if Baelor had it, then it would have come from, I mean, but his mother would have been a Valorian, so I don't know. That's
No.
But a lot of it, I think you're right. It's a lot to do with when it seems to suit the story. So it can be something just latent in the genes that just doesn't come up very often, and maybe it just needs a little nudge, like something, you know, like the plot needs it for it to show up.
But I mean, it could also be specifically, maybe in if you want to look at it as rather than just saying always when George needs it for the plot, you could also look at it in times of threat to House Targaryen. So we have Daenerys the Dreamer, and then we have Daeron, the Drunken, and Bloodraven.
Which the other one we have, of course, is Daemon Blackfire. No,
yes, but there you're starting to have these conflicts that threaten the existence of House Targaryen, and then you have Rhaegar and you have Dany. So is it something that to do in times of danger to House Targaryen that they get these little nudges from wherever?
Like we could just as easily, it would be very easy to imagine that Maegor had, but part of his so sort of complex, his tyrannical approach to things was because he dreamed that that's how he should rule. But of course, the histories would never talk about it. He wouldn't tell anyone. His mother was the only person he confided in. So yeah, I think a lot of it can be put down to our sources. In this case, you know, Gildain, Yandel, other people who are sources who are not themselves present. And Linda's right. Like, if the person is a character in the story, it'll come out naturally. But if they're a historical figure, it might never be revealed.
I mean, you could easily see a story centering on one of Viserys' many children.
Yeah.
That turns out that one of them had abilities.
Yeah.
If you got more insight to them.
Yeah, it's just my doubt is that maybe from a meta perspective, George could at least have used the word dream. Maybe like Gildain, for example, dismisses multiple things like the magic of, let's say, Alice River, or he mentions magic in the book.
Yeah.
And usually he dismisses multiple sources like mushroom. He could have mentioned some dream and then dismissed them. Like he could have written, it's said that Aegon invaded Westeros because he had a dream about the others coming. But this is just speculation. But instead he never mentioned the word dream in that context. And so I came up, let's say, with the theory about the fact that maybe dragon dreams are a response from the magic of the Targaryens to the fact that the dragons are missing. Because except for Daenerys, every other dragon dream happens when the dragons are not present, are dead. It's very interesting for Daenerys. In the first book, she has a lot of dragon dreams that lead her to the birth of dragons. But after that, she has other dreams and visions, but they are from Quaithe or from other sources.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. It looks like the dreams lead the Targaryens to the birth of dragons. We can see this with Summerall, because we know that Aemon and all his brothers' dreams have the dragon dreams. We know Daeron the Drunken. We know Aeron Brightflame. He dreamed to actually be a dragon, and all the dreams led to their death, and all their dreams led them to try and hatch dragons. And so maybe the blood in the magic in the blood of the Targaryens permits them to bond with dragons. But if there are no dragons, this magic causes dragon dreams that lead the Targaryen to birth new dragons.
Well, I like that way of thinking, that basically there's something missing, and then the blood is trying to set up a situation where there's going to be dragons again. It tries to find dragons for them. And possibly then one could explain Danish again as a warning, perhaps, that they are going to the dragons will die. If so, it's kind of an emergency situation that if you don't get out of here, there won't be any more dragons. So maybe dragon dreams then are dragons communicating with Targaryens from wherever dragons are when there aren't any dragons. I like it.
Yeah,
I like
it's
it.
a bit tinfoily, but
I like it because it fits and it's very neat, and I like thinking of magic that way.
Yeah, and also I thought about this and I made videos before Fire and Blood. Then Fire and Blood came out, and actually there were no dragon dreams because it talked about the story when they had dragons, and so it pretty much let's say confirmed some of my suspicions, but of course it's probably nothing. So let's go on with the next question.
All right. Speaking of plots, various plots, it is my impression that there are parallels between Westeros history and current events in Song of Ice and Fire. So, in your opinion, to what degree is George R.R. Martin's history cyclical? Because we have a lot of parallels, for example, with the current history and the Dance of the Dragons. So, yeah.
George even uses that line from talking about the arms of House Toland, of the dragon eating its tail, and that was it Archmaester Rigney, which is a reference to Robert Jordan, the writer of The Wheel of Time, that history is a wheel or time is a circle. I think George certainly deliberately creates parallels. I mean, just a very obvious example, if you've read The Wheel of Fire, you saw the family tree of the Targaryens, and the Targaryen family tree for Jaehaerys and his offspring changes quite a lot when Fire and Blood comes out, because George realized that he wanted to create a kind of parallel by introducing another Daenerys. And he said, like, I like the symmetry of it. I like the sort of the way you could perhaps read it as reflecting on Daenerys' story, maybe. Which if it's true, I mean, I think fans of Daenerys need to be really worried about what's going to happen to her. Although I guess Game of Thrones maybe has revealed kind of where things may possibly end. Again, the journey is going to be very different. I think, circumstance, things are going to be very different. So it's the journey that matters. But in any case, so yes, I think George uses cycles and things a bit. He likes setting up parallels of events. He likes paralleling characters, and he likes paralleling events, and he likes paralleling, I think, the past and the present have the parallels as well.
I don't know that he necessarily sees it as history repeating itself, in a sense that there's some quality to the repetitions that are sort of inherent in the history, but he likes his parallels, whether they are with history or between different characters. He likes that interaction between the past and the present. He likes playing with how they reflect each other. And just more broadly, we see in George's work overall that there are themes, there are names, there are character archetypes that he likes revisiting. And when he revisits them within the same story, it is with the intention of echoing certain aspects of that character, of those events. And you don't have to be aware of them. Like you can enjoy the story without it, but it enriches it when you pick those up. Absolutely.
Yeah, a while ago I've made a list of threads about the parallels between the dance and current event. And it's funny because there are lots of parallels, like Tywin Lannister and Tyrion Lannister, or Larys Strong and Varys. And it's funny because maybe sometimes even the names are a similarity, like Varys, Larys. Yeah, it's been fun trying to look for them and trying to analyze them.
I think certainly that when he it fleshed out the details of Fire and Blood. Even when he first did the sidebars for the World of Ice and Fire, and they just grew, we could see that, okay, here he's looking at foreshadowing or commenting on current events by doing a similar scenario in the past, and he definitely likes to play around with those aspects.
So, if we are not mistaken, you have worked as consults for the first season of Game of Thrones. What was your role during this time, and how was your experience?
Well, we weren't officially involved. When I got to visit the set when they were still filming the first season, I visited with George and Paris and Brian Cogman, who was a writer at the time, not yet a producer. He was formerly the assistant he showed us around personally through the set and so on. And I got to know him, and we got in touch. And through him, I started to receive questions, like when George wasn't available for them, he would turn to me and ask for help finding something that he couldn't find, or just answering questions. Sometimes we, even spitballing, just things where he was trying to come up with something, and I just threw out some ideas. And so it was never official, but it was kind of unofficial, and it went all the way through like the 7th season, technically Linda reminded me actually the 8th season, because
the question came, I think, while they were working on the 7th,
yes.
which suggests that maybe they hadn't decided where they were putting it.
Yeah.
Because he asked if there were any more lyrics to Jenny of Oldstones anywhere that we knew about, that George had mentioned anywhere.
So obviously that was then used in the 8th season in that song. So yeah, it was just, we always, even Brian is aware of my opinions of where the show went and so on, and I stopped and he respected that, and but I always said, like, regardless of my feeling of whether I'm happy or not, I mean, we wanted to do what we could to help them. Like, if they wanted help with anything, we were always happy to help. So it was been very productive. We stay in touch with Brian, and he's off doing other things now. I think he's working on turning Kurosawa's Yojimbo into a modern day TV series. That'll be interesting to see how that develops. But yeah, that was very fun. And then obviously we got involved in the pilot, The Long Night. We mentioned that a while back. We consulted officially on that one. Actually, we signed NDAs and all that. So we can't really discuss what we did, but it was related to what, our role as historians and creators, writers of the World of Ice and Fire. And kind of a shame that one didn't go forward. But obviously I'm sure HBO had good reasons. I've always wondered if they would have stuck, because as I recall, I mean, didn't they shoot part of it off the Amalfi Coast in Italy? Am I right about that? I think they shot some of it in Italy, right?
Yes. Yeah, they shot. See, part of the pilot was.
So it would have been amazing if they actually had kept using, because I mean, Italy is filled with, medieval and also ancient ruins and so on. It would have been really interesting. On the other hand, I've always heard that Italy is very expensive to film in, so maybe not. Maybe not.
Okay, so let's stay on the successor shows, because as you just said, you stopped watching Game of Thrones after season 5, but will you watch the successor shows, starting with House of the Dragon?
Yes, I mean, I see it as an entirely new thing. We have discussed, because it's an odd position. Like, A Song of Ice and Fire was a source for Game of Thrones. A Song of Ice and Fire is written George R.R. Martin. The House of the Dragons exists because the World of Ice and Fire exists. I mean, the material for pretty much the entire material for Desert of Dragons was written for the World of Ice and Fire. It wasn't written by us, it was written by George, but it was written for the book that we co-wrote with him. So we are not sure about reviewing it. We may not bother reviewing it, or not seriously bother. We might feel uncomfortable reviewing something that is based on a book that we co-wrote, as opposed to something George wrote alone. So I think we may do videos and things about it, but more just about like the history and the setting, and not really discussing episodes in any detail. I'm sure, you know, if Linda wants to give her opinion or whatever, but I feel really odd about it.
No,
it feels to me like...
I think I feel the same in this regard, because that really marks the difference where between, when it comes to Song of Ice and Fire, we can sort of say that, well, we're really just fans, right? And when it comes to the book series, even if we've helped George with little things here and there, we are primarily fans of the novels. But then when it comes to the projects that we've indirectly and directly collaborated on, you kind of, okay, now you're involved in a creator role as well, then reviewing feels a little odd. But I do want to comment on details, fleshing out background material and stuff that they don't bring up and so on, connecting to, you know, when did we first learn this detail and where did what did they change, for example, commenting on changes from the source material and what they end up doing in the TV show, I think, and what that might mean for the future of House of the Dragon. So those sort of things I feel that we can provide as you know, Song of Ice and Fire experts in that sense. But reviewing, no, you know, I stuck with reviewing through Game of Thrones, but I think it will be much easier not to do it with the reviewing part with House of the Dragon or the other successor shows, possibly more in the sense of, like, if we do get an animated show, it would be interesting to discuss just how it translates to that medium. If we end up seeing the play somehow, it would be interesting to discuss and sort of review just the form of it, but staying away from perhaps the more nitty-gritty reviewing.
Other than The Long Night, have you been involved in other successor shows?
No, we've not been in touch with anyone on whatever pitches have been done. I know that the House of the Dragon showrunner, Ryan Condal, is like a genuine dyed-in-the-wool fan who read, I think he said he's been reading the books since Storm of Swords long before Game of Thrones. He's not someone like, I mean, as we know, it makes a difference in my mind, like how long you have been a fan, or like when did you start? Like Benioff and Weiss were sent the books specifically to, like, what do you guys think about adapting them? They became fans, but they weren't fans initially. So it'll be interesting to see what difference that makes to someone who, if they've been involved in the series, if this has been part of what they've been interested in for a long time, what impact that'll have of how he helps kind of translate it to the screen. It'll be really interesting to see.
Mostly we expect a lot of attention to detail when it comes to props, given that he's a huge collector.
Yeah, we are following all the news also. We are pretty happy with the fact that the writer's room looks a bit better than the one from Game of Thrones.
More people, and it's one of the things I think I recall one of the last videos I did about Game of Thrones was like, I hope that, you know, you need more people in that writer's room. It can't just be 3 people basically writing everything, or 4 people who work on the production all the time. I mean, you need to have some people who maybe come from outside on occasion. And they did the first season. Jane Espenson wrote an episode. They did a second season. Victoria Strauss, I believe, did 2 episodes. Mm-hmm. But after that, it just became very insular, and I think that didn't help them in the long run, especially when George stopped writing as well. As one less writer, they added Dave Hill.
Dave,
right?
Hill,
yeah. But sorry,
I
never actually met him, so I don't. Yeah, Dave Hill. But otherwise, I think more writers and is a good idea for any show going forward. I mean, when you look at all the other great TV shows, most of them, you know, whether it's in Sopranos, Deadwood, Breaking Bad, had generally much larger writers' rooms and more varied writers' rooms. People would come in and out. Mad Men, same thing. It helps keep it fresh, I think, and I think that's important for a show like this.
Okay. That's very interesting because I study screenwriting, and yeah, I work in cinema actually, so I have a few projects on the works, etc. And the main thing for me is having a very diverse writers' room. That's very important to me. So yeah, seeing Game of Thrones being so insular to me wasn't very good. So yeah, but
also, I'll say, I mean, I think it was a mistake for them to have after Espenson and Strauss, there were no more women who ever worked on the show as writers, which just seems very strange. They had directors, female directors, on occasion, but they didn't. It just felt an odd choice of hers. But at the same time, I mean, the viewership didn't seem to mind. Lots of people, but I think especially this story has such a. Women have such a
it also has overall
role.
A lot of different potential
Yes.
point of views in the story, which means that having different people to write it. I know very little about screenwriting and such a process of writing a TV show, but it's interesting how one generally feels that more writers are better to keep it fresh, where nobody would generally tell a writer of a book, like, maybe you should get somebody to write a few chapters for you to freshen it up.
A very different medium, yeah.
Yes, it's interesting that the differences in the medium causes those different demands.
You can see that even in film as well, because I mean, it's like some of the most heralded films had like one or two writers, and that's all. But then you hear about all the disasters where it's like a screenwriter did the first draft, a new one did a second draft, another gets brought in a third draft, script doctor gets flown in to do work as they're filming, and it's because it's a complete mess. So it's very very
I guess it's the fact that the TV show becomes more like an anthology of stories, even if it is a continuous story. You have little stories within it, and
I've also, I think it's a timeline. I mean, a film will have months to do just 2 hours, and you've got a TV series. They're trying to knock out an episode every 2 weeks or so.
It's true. It's true. It's the workload is a significant part of it, and we
have a big problem with Benioff and Weiss. Benioff and Weiss were writing like half the episodes every season. They were sometimes directing. They were executive producing, they were on stuff. And I mean, I was hearing from like the third season, very exhausted. And I think that had some impact on how the show developed and how it went over
and the
time.
fact that they wanted out.
And the fact they wanted to come to end.
Which you can understand with that workload, but they had a choice on not taking on. So hopefully that won't happen with House of the Dragon.
Let's hope not, truly. So no more Game of Thrones, I swear. But let's talk about Dunk and Egg, because the novels are a goldmine regarding aspects such as the Dragon Dreams, Blackfire Rebellions, Blood Raven, and so much more. And there are numerous theories around the novellas as well. So I know you have some sort of idea of what's going to happen in Dunk and Egg in details that we other fans don't know about. So maybe, of course, without spoiling anything, have you ever came across a theory that made you think, oh, that's actually very similar, or exactly what's going to happen in future novellas?
I mean, from way back, it was my theory then before we worked on this, and we had all these notes from George. But I recall it was the first time we met George at the Worldcon in Glasgow, where George was having breakfast, and a bunch of fans were sitting around with him, and he was talking about the Dunk and Egg stories and like their titles, and that they're all kind of roles that Dunk has in his life. So the Hedge Knight, and, the Sworn Sword, and I said, but and I told him, well, but the last one will be titled Summerhall, right? And he kind of just gave me a look and smiled. He didn't say anything. So I assume that is the end point of the Dunk and Egg stories. Whether the title, to me, it'll be quite a thing of like all the titles are roles that he has for life, and the last one goes to something completely different because it kind of marks a a turning point, so
Yeah.
we'll see. General, since the time that we did learn more, have fans hit on anything?
No one has certainly hit on
There's
any of the details that he
No.
The details that was from a conference call with him for sort of filling out the last bits of that time period in the world of Ice and Fire, and where we hear him going through his notes, and he said, "Ooh, well, now that I can't tell you," and those were some unpleasant bastards. And then, but I'm not going to tell you that. And this you can't put in the book, and this I'll tell you, but you can't put in the book. And that's where the fun part was, where he told us a few things that he said that we couldn't put into the world of Ice and Fire. Then we did our draft for that section. He went over it and put those details back in anyway. So that's obviously where we got the fantastic art of Duncan fighting the Laughing Storm.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the details that we had been like, okay, Duncan as Lord Commander
fighting against Lord Baratheon and the Laughing Storm.
Yes.
I mean, that was and like we can't use that, and then he decided to put it in after I think
we requested the art as well.
Yes,
I think he specifically requested that too. Also,
the one thing I will say about what we know, and I think I can be vague enough, and I haven't really seen.
I'll leave that to you. I'm terrible at being vague.
I think people haven't thought enough about Arya Bright Flame, and the details of what we learn in the world of Ice and Fire about him, and how that fits into things. There's some stuff there that George hasn't really. There's some dots that people have not connected as far as I've seen. So I'll leave you guys with that. Yeah.
We will spend the night thinking about it.
Probably. There are some fascinating theories around. I believe there was a temporary title, the Cell Sword or something, that people were like, Dunk will be exiled, or he will be a spy for Bloodraven, and he'll join the Golden Company for a while, which is fascinating, because fans really come up with the most various theories. Yeah, it's very tinfoily, but it kind of makes sense. I don't know how to explain it, but
interesting, actually. Yes, I mean,
it would be really interesting to get that insight into the past of the Golden Company, or and of course the ones that he's hinted at with Winterfell and the wolf stuff.
The wolf stuff.
Yeah, the she-wolves of Winterfell. I think that's pretty common knowledge. The next
what did he end up calling it? That's when he's talking about the women, right? And
the wolf women. Yes,
the wolves. Yes. When you give me those looks, I can think, am I saying something I'm not supposed to be saying again?
That's the next story. I mean, I think the last thing he said is he might try and get that one finished after the Winds of Winter, before moving on.
That's been one of the worst parts, actually, of doing the World of Ice and Fire, and then helping with editing of Fire and Blood and so on. Like, okay, which of these things are actually known, and which things am I not supposed to say? It all blends together in your head after a while. It was okay when we had all the details from the notes that he sent us about, like, Daeron's reign and Aegon IV and so on. When we just had that for our game, we knew that, okay, we can't talk about any of this. We can tease it out on the game, but we can't talk about any of it. But that was very easy to keep separate from all the other history. Yeah. Now it's gotten worse.
So, George has said on numerous occasions that he does not intend to add more POV, with the exception of the prologue and epilogue. Still, if you could choose, what POV would you like to add?
It's a good one.
Ashara Dane?
No. That doesn't work.
She's Quaithy.
She's Quaithy of a shy, and he's doing. No. You can't have Quafi as a point of view.
Oh,
I would have said before A Dance with Dragons that Barristan Selmy was the person I wanted. Obviously, we've gotten Barristan now.
And now you wish you hadn't gotten Barristan as a point of view because it means bad things for Barristan's lifespan.
Probably. That's a pretty good one. Mance Raider, I think, would be a really interesting point of view character. Although perhaps not at the particular moment, depending on what's true or not about the letter. But
I can only think of dead people.
People, yeah.
Yeah, and they don't make for good point of views, but I would have loved a Rhaegar point of view, and then I would have loved an Oberyn point of view. But that's just a fangirl talking. Other than that, no, it's do you think Howland is entirely out of the question as a point of, or is he going to give in?
It depends,
if he's showing Howland, is he going to feel that he has to give him a point of view?
That's a good question.
Or is he just going to be a prologue or an epilogue character and then?
Who would have been an interesting point of view, but they're dead. Like it would have been kind of fun to have Renly as a point of view before in a Clash of Kings. Yes. But of course, George made a deliberate decision. Like he didn't want to have the kings have point of views. They're seen from outside.
Loras then as a point of view.
Loras, I suppose. I'm a big fan of Loras Churro, so yes. But now I don't know. Now now would be actually interesting. Depending on his
if he's not dead.
If he's not dead. If he's not on his deathbed.
Dead people make such bad point of views.
The thing is, as you say, if they become a point of view, the chances of her surviving kind of falls quite a lot. So
yeah, but his chances aren't good anyway.
Yeah,
sorry.
Let's go to the next question. Do you think A Song of Ice and Fire shares some themes or elements with other George's stories?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. To be clear, George, there are themes that you will find repeated a lot of times and examined in different ways in stories of his over decades. I think it was noted. It's been 50 years now since his first writing was published. So he's been in the business for 5 decades, and there are things that he has looked at over and over again. There are themes that matter to him a lot, and he's changed as a writer over time. He used to say, when he was in his 20s and so on, he was a much more a romantic writer. If you've read The Thousand Worlds science fiction stories, A Song for Laia, Bitter Blooms, those stories all have a sort of a romantic, melancholy feeling to them. The fever, it's not a coincidence that the renaming of the fever dream in the novel is Ozymandias after the Shelley poem. So yes, there definitely is. What I will say is, just to be clear, themes, and even sometimes like there are names, images George likes that he'll reuse. The first Shadow Cat is in one of the Haviland Tough stories. There's a Jeffrey Lion in I think it's in Night Flyers. I think Jeffrey Lion is one of the characters who's obviously got the Joffrey and a lion figure who's this blonde, green-eyed, handsome guy, kind of a Jamie. So there's certain things that he keeps revisiting.
But they're not in the same universe.
But they're not the same universe. I know they're
in the same writer's head.
Yes, they're in the same writer's head.
The connection.
They are his many children, but they are not directly related. He's remarked, I recall him remarking a long time ago about how famous science fiction authors like Robert Anton Heinlein or Isaac Asimov in their later years try to retroactively put over prior works together into a shared universe, like treating them as they'd always been together. And he kind of said, that was a mistake, but for whatever reason, old age drove him to do it, and he didn't want to make that same mistake. The Thousand, A Song of Ice and Fire is not in the Thousand Worlds universe. It's a fantasy universe. Science does not explain things. It's magic. The science is for the science fiction stories. So, because I know Preston Jacobs and other people who are very, very smart, very clever, very dedicated fans but I think they do try to put it all together, and it's very fun to try and put it together, but it doesn't go together that way. It's thematic. Yeah.
Yeah, and also maybe some Easter eggs like buckle on the pill side.
Exactly.
They are just Easter eggs, let's say.
Yeah, just a little fun nod to his past work and so on.
I mean, he likes to reference his own works and other works, basically. You can have a lot of fun going through the family trees and looking at heraldry and finding references to various things.
Yeah.
Well, yes,
Muppets as well.
So he likes playing with those things. He likes playing with intertexts that aren't there to say anything great, but just to give you that little, I recognize that.
So our fans or the Song of Ice and Fire Italian community is really fascinated with Dorn, and we know you're both fan of Dorn. So while writing The World of Ice and Fire, what details maybe did you really want to put in, but you couldn't because George maybe said, "Oh no, I changed my mind. You can't put it in." Because, for example, lots of people want to know the name of Doreen Oberyn, Delia's mother, or Ausdane's motto. Yeah, we're very fixated about the names here. So.
Yes, I know there was a fan who actually gave George her theory about the name of the mother. I think was it not based on the names of Oberyn's children?
That's right.
And that he thought one of them might have been named after Oberyn's mother. That absolute truth is, I mean, we asked again, and George, he just hadn't yet come up with something, or he didn't really feel a great need for it because it wasn't going to come up in the story. Maybe that has changed. Maybe he'll decide on a name.
I mean, it's like how Ned's mother was Lady Stark for a long while.
Yes, I don't think he had her name for a very long time because he wasn't planning to use it, so he didn't come up with it. And sometimes names matter a lot to him. He wants to make sure the names fit the characters, that they sound right. So
yes, I think it's a lot, and I mean, I've seen other writers work this way as well. Some want to have these things figured out, and others figure that, well, I don't quite know, and I guess it's more of the gardener types and the ones that want to be surprised by their own story. I don't quite know if this character might somehow become more important than I imagined, and I don't want to be stuck with a name that I don't like, or a name that, because obviously when you have several thousand characters, at least 2,000, right, at last count, you're going to have some names that are, shall we say, less appealing than others.
Yes.
Like, I don't think we're ever going to get a longer story about Benjicott, for example. It's perhaps not the most beautiful sounding name of the ones that George has come up with. There are some others that are just, they're serviceable names. When you have to make up so many names, you'll make up a lot that aren't really that inspired. So for the ones where he doesn't really have to make up a name, it's like, yeah, I'll just, I'll save myself the trouble of making up a name. And then if I want to feature this character, I'll have an opportunity to think about picking something nice, something that has some sort of resonance.
Right.
It would have been lovely to know, especially obviously since she was, not just the consort, she was the actual princess of Dorne, and fairly significant in the story. But that's not one. I think that if he had made that one up, there wouldn't have been a problem putting it in.
Right. And as to Dorne in general, do we know? I actually, to be honest, I think other than, we have seen the Dane family tree. Or at least the version he had at the time, which I think he'll put in the Winds of Winter. He did offer it to us in case we wanted to include it in some fashion, like in the app that we've done with Random House, but we haven't gotten to that point yet, going that far. So I think I'll have to wait for the Winds of Winter. But I otherwise, I think we pretty.
I think there were very few cuts in the
Dorne section.
In the Dorne section, because the Nymeria bits were pretty much put in as they were.
So I think their fans know.
And same, I know that Dane Motto, he's been tossing around some ideas that he weren't.
No.
Again, there is a typical case of, I'm not really happy with it. He's got one, and he said it doesn't really quite feel right for him. And then he holds it for as long as possible until he can come up with, because, you know, when you print it in the books, that's it. And George really likes to keep his options open for as long as possible, unless he's like, yes, this is right. I know this is right, and I'm not going to change my mind on it.
I suggested Dawn Brings Light, but he didn't seem interested in using that one for some reason.
Don't understand why.
That's good. That's pretty good.
Yes, especially since Dawn is Lightbringer, right?
Yeah. Maybe a bit on the nose, maybe. Yes.
Yeah.
So we all know that George has been influenced by Shakespeare. Which are your favorite examples of this influence of A Song of Ice and Fire?
Well, it's a bit difficult because obviously a lot of his influence is the Wars of Roses, and Shakespeare dealt with the Wars of Roses. I would say Tyrion as Richard III, as Shakespeare's Richard III, is something that fits a little bit, because obviously Shakespeare's history was his histories were a exercise in propaganda. They were based on Holinshead's histories, which were decidedly slanted towards the Tudor side rather than the Plantagenet side. So the idea of Tyrion is a little bit that we are inside Tyrion's head. We see who he is, but we also see how he looks to the rest of the world. We see it, for example, people gossiping about what things he must have done when he, killed his father and so on. There's all sorts of gossips turning him into this monster, and which is what happens to the figure of Richard III historically. So that's an obvious one. Another one, which I'm not sure is actually Shakespeare, more so in general literature and classical, is the way prophecy can often have weird loopholes, or have things like they can trick you with like metaphors, like, in Macbeth. Macbeth is told that he'll be king until Great Burnham Wood comes to the hill. And that'll never happen. And then it's his enemies using branches from the forest as disguises that make it. So we have that happening in the prophecies. Like Melisandre often reads fantasy her prophecies one way, and she misses how they actually happened. I mean, the obvious ones, for example, she saw Renly defeating Stannis. And so that's why she killed Renly, because but it turns out, that just leads to Renly's ghost showing up. And so she sees the future, and the future seems to be immutable, but she doesn't always realize that. She still thinks it can be changed, which is kind of interesting, actually. It makes her a very dangerous person, Melisandre Vashai. She sees things and she doesn't always understand them, which is very common with prophecy in, like, the Delphic Oracle would tell you something about, the wooden walls defending you. And then somebody says, well, okay, we'll have the ships. And that'll be our walls. And
it's whether he looks more at Shakespeare there, or just obviously Shakespeare looked at history and other examples as well. So it can be more difficult to sort out what he looks at there. But I think the way that he frames certain things in how history can be used as propaganda, and when he writes the various points of views in Fire and Blood and World of Ice and Fire, looking at how different chroniclers can shape history very differently, certainly he would be thinking, I think, about the way that Shakespeare used his plays to put forward a certain view of things, and obviously the fact that he then has a play put on in Bravos to tie into the emergence of theater and how that can then be used as a tool. We're not quite there in Westeros yet. We get some mummers performances that can make fun of current events and so on, but not the really more complicated commentary hasn't reached Westeros yet. But give it another 50 years.
Okay, let's go to the next question. That you mentioned the game Blood of Dragons, that you came in contact with George for that. How did the idea came to you about the game, and what was your experience with the game in general?
Well, we met on another role-playing game based on Tolkien's books. So that was a hobby that we both had at the time, and we then played on a couple of games based on the Wheel of Time together. And we started, I guess, thinking a little bit about, we tried a few other fantasy games and so on, and I at least started thinking a bit about, Elio says he wasn't really thinking in that direction, but I was sort of pondering what would be an interesting thing to do my own game on. And then after I had picked up a Game of Thrones and then persuaded Elio to read it, I started thinking in that direction, and we started, the very first project that we started then was, other than doing some of the heraldry, was doing the concordance, inspired by a similar document of sort of setting facts that existed for one of the Wheel of Time games. So we thought, well, noodle around with this, and then maybe we'll see about, we were able to find George's email online and ask if he's, willing to let us do it. And we try to put our case as solidly as possible about how we would do it so that it wouldn't be, any copyright infringements per se, and that we would not use his characters, and that we would ask players to note that they were using, if they were posting logs of roleplay and so on, that it was all with permission and so on. And then without our idea to do Blood of Dragons, Westeros would not have existed. We started doing the heraldry and the concordance, and then afterwards the So Spake Martin. Yes, that was because we had then collected and had a website where we could add things to, but ultimately all of it was about collecting setting details. And initially the website was going to be primarily a resource for our players. And then the fan community of the books started growing, and we realized we'd seen some of this within the Wheel of Time fandom. So a lot of what we did was inspired by and to some extent modeled on what we had seen in the Wheel of Time fandom. They had a large FAQ, they had where they had community discussions and contributions. We were never able to quite do that in the same way, which is probably because they had a lot more, even more mysteries and things to discuss and argue about. But yeah, without the game, I don't think any of it would have happened. We would have ended up discussing on various forums, but I don't know that we would have started a website, and I don't think we'd been involved in the World of Ice and Fire or anything like that.
So we are all really thankful for your idea about the game.
Okay. So this is one, I'll admit, it's one of my favorites that has arrived from Exus subscribers. The very first Legends of Westeros seem to share a common pattern in which the heroes such as Duran Godscliff, the Grey King Galadon of Mor, and others tries to obtain a power like the Fire of the Gods, very similar to the Prometheus myth, with the help of an unnaturally beautiful and powerful woman. Can it be the same historical event mythologized in different ways in different parts of Westeros? If that's the case, may the original event be similar to the legend of the Winged Knight of the Vale? and his wife, which was a child of the forest.
That's an interesting question. That is a good, interesting question. I don't want to be definitive in any way. To me, it feels a bit difficult because I mean, Galadon of Morn, we're talking the beautiful woman here is the just maid, right? I mean, or was there a wife mentioned in his story?
Not a wife, I believe.
There's a just maid, his sword, which obviously is supposed to have, I think, been a gift from the maiden. So that feels a little difficult to tie together. And the Grey King, I mean, there's no real evidence that we have that the children were ever on the Iron Islands. And they have their own stories about Merlings and so on. I would say what's more likely here is not so much a deliberate thing, but more, but there are certain motifs that George likes using when he thinks about very, as you say, you know, what's common to ancient myth, what kind of things happen, what are very archetypal things. And I think that's what's being seen here. It's not that he's saying that's all one event that's being mythologized in different ways. It's the same kind of concepts being mythologized in the same way, but they're not. I don't think the intention is that they are. I mean,
I understand thinking in that direction, because obviously with the World of Ice and Fire, we got all these different versions of the Azor Ahai myth under different names, and the idea that this is some kind of archetypal event or something that has occurred in multiple places. So there is something interesting there. And I mean, the thing that pops into my head as well as a comparison is obviously as well the Night's King and his beautiful corpse woman. And that these dangerous female figures that either help or help for a price seems to be an interesting motif, certainly, that George likes to revisit. Whether they are if you think about the main character or the male characters, they're as inspired by Prometheus, and I'm sure if he's seeing these as Pandora figures to some extent, perhaps, that are in possession of a dangerous ability or knowledge that ends up being unleashed on mankind. But certainly we saw there in the World of Ice and Fire that he liked the idea of playing with a myth that becomes an integral part of the history of many different civilizations, and whether these are all supposed to be the same Azor Ahai last hero, or whether similar events are supposed to have happened in the far past in different cultures. I think there's something to a theme, at least, there, that he likes playing with the mysterious female figure, whether they are helpful or seem helpful but are in fact not.
So in the World of Ice and Fire, we are introduced to Sotorius and Ultos. Do you think that these continents will be relevant in the current story, or are they just for world building?
I think they're primarily world building. They're terra incognita. They are there to expand the horizon and let you think about that there's greater mysteries in the universe.
Just the way that he introduces Sotorius by basically having the idea of somebody trying to fly over it with a dragon, and it just can't find the end of it. It just goes on and on to show that there's so much more to this world, that so to contextualize our story, that it's taking place in one little part of the world, and is it even going to affect the whole world, the outcome of it, and so yeah, it's a scale thing.
It's sort of how like with the Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth, like Middle Earth is this northwestern little section of this entire continent, which goes off the map. We don't even know the southern and eastern boundaries of it. So it is a useful reminder. But I think it is now, whether with the push of HBO Max to try and develop more stories and things to put to the screen, whether someone will hit some idea, the
exploration of Sophorius.
Yes, the pirates of the of Sophorius, the pirates of the basilisks or something, if some sort of Jack Sparrow type adventure. I don't know. I who knows? They're definitely throwing all sorts of things out there to see what would be interesting to tell.
But when George put it in, he saw it as a way of showing the size of the world and what is still left undiscovered.
And we were just as surprised as everyone else when he started having this oily black stone showing up in all these places. That was very interesting. That's 100% George.
Okay, so you have no idea about that. The actual, maybe even George just put it there.
To be honest, yes, I think it's a thing where he put in. Okay, that sounds cool. I don't know what it means, but it sounds cool.
I mean, he'll clearly get images and ideas in his head, like this evokes something, and I'll put it in.
Does he usually do something like that? For example, the death of Maegor, for us, will forever remain a mystery. But did he decide something, or even he doesn't know which is the right answer?
I think he doesn't really know the answer. He doesn't think it's relevant. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's more, have you read his other stories? Have you read with Morning Comes Mistfall? Yes. Did you see what he likes about enigmas and mysteries being important? Like when they're gone, life gets a lot duller. So I think it's one of the things he said about things like the TV show and so on. Like, he's afraid that if he sees the end of something being done, or if he contributes to the writing the end of a TV series, for example, like it would affect his ability to actually continue, because it's like, I don't want to know all the details yet. I want to discover them as I write. So I definitely think that these are elements like where he hasn't decided.
It's like with Aegon's letter. I don't think he's decided what's in the letter he gets either. It's a sort of thing like he probably has maybe a few ideas what it could be, perhaps. Like with Maegor, he has presents a couple of options, but then he said, well, I'd rather, I'd like to be able to speculate on it myself. I like leaving mysteries even for myself in the story. And if push comes to shove and I need this for something, then I will decide. But until then, it's a mystery to me as well. I think that's really how he operates on a lot of these things. Okay,
I think we can close here. So thank you for this great opportunity and for everything that you did for the Song of Ice and Fire community in all these years.
Thank you very much. It's been our pleasure.
It's been a pleasure, and it's been so long now, actually, since we did one of these. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a fairly quiet time after the show ended, and
the global pandemic,
and then like everyone being under lockdown at home. So it was great having this sort of interaction again. Definitely enjoyed it a lot, and great questions.
Thank you very much. And of course, for us, it's an honor. So whenever you want, just write us in DM, and we are always open to do it again.
Absolutely.
And of course, I will put all the relevant links in the video description. But if you want to say where people can find you or anything that you want to add.
Sure. Well, www.westeros.org, of course, the main site. We have a forum, we have the wiki, as you know. Westeros.org on Twitter, @Westeros.org, and I think it's the same on Instagram, but I don't really use it very much.
And YouTube, but we haven't.
We haven't done anything on YouTube in quite a while. It's been difficult to the dog, he gets bored of us sitting in front of a camera for a long stretch. So we'll have to work that out sometime. But yeah, that's where we're at, and we'll see what the future brings about any other. We're all waiting for George to finish The Winds of Winter. We're fingers crossed that we'll get the manuscript and help him fact check it to make sure everything's right, so we can get a first look. But we have no knowledge when it will happen. It'll be done when it's finished, basically. But until then, we are
waiting along with everyone else, now waiting for little tidbits of the various new projects. So it'll be interesting to see, more discussions on that around all these things. So it'll be fun to see the various communities in lots of different countries livening up once again.
Okay, so I thank you again. And I thank my co-hosts Saya and Rory, and Valardo Eris.